Well, thank you, everyone. We are so grateful that you've taken out your Friday evening to join us live on live stream. This is our very first time doing a live stream, so we're working through some technical glitches, but we're so grateful. We've got such a qualified team with Deva Media Group and Be Excited. They have been working very diligently with us behind the scenes. And as well as Regima Collective, our three corporate sponsors, our three main sponsors. We just want to give a shout out to them as well as our other sponsors. We definitely have people that have been supporting us through Awesome Creations by Janelle. And we have the Rest Girl Group with Delonda Adams. And we have Deshay's Butters and Creams with Toro Burl. And so we just want to thank those individuals for how they've contributed to us getting here tonight. So I'm going to be so transparent before you right now in this very moment. I have loved putting on these conferences and bringing people together. And it has been such a joy to see the fruits come forth of other people saying they've been ministered to, they've been encouraged, they've been empowered, and all these different ways that I've gotten great feedback over the last 3 years since we first began Grieve Gracefully. The other candid part is I've hid behind getting other speakers before you. This is my first year coming before you to speak about my story and to share the intricacies of how my grief journey propelled what we are now experiencing today, which is Adam's purpose. I will do my best to allow myself to be transparent before you, to be real before you, and to tell you the raw truths of what a grief journey truly is like. Now, I have titled this message, Courageous Hope, Compassionate Help, and Collective Healing. But to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure what will come out of it when I just kind of relax and let the words flow through me. No matter how much I think I've prepared for tonight, it's embarking in a new territory. And telling a grief story is something, no matter how many times you do it, it still brings you back to those points of grief. It still pulls up those moments and those memories that have been devastating and have been hard. And so I now join along the courageous people who've come alongside me, that have paneled, that have spoken, that have empowered you before, that I'm among them now, where it's been pretty easy to just kind of coordinate things. So pray with me and pray for me as I unveil my story. My story of grief began in 2018. It was what I thought originally was a beautiful season until it turned a little bit upside down. In 2018, I celebrated milestones. I celebrated the milestone of being a graduate from college. After so many years of trying to complete a degree, failing school, going back and forth, I finally did it. I became a college graduate. And in that season where I had so many highs, it was followed by so many lows. The first instance of grief and loss for me was at the passing of my beloved mother. And I call her mother. She's my husband's mother. She always called me daughter, and I always called her mom. During the time of my graduation, Mom's health was failing rapidly. She had entered into the hospital just a day before my husband's birthday, and she remained in some type of a health care, whether it was hospital or hospice, not hospice, but nursing home facility for about 22 to 23 days. And I was the daughter in love that was looking forward to taking care of my mother in love. I was excited about becoming a caregiver. I felt like it would be a privilege to be a caregiver, not a burden. And so I did everything that I could to position myself to support my husband and to just ensure that my mother-in-law's latter days would be as comforting as possible. I did not get to fulfill that calling, that I thought I would get to fulfill. Mom died. She died the day after we got her home from the nursing facility. And I remember feeling so angry that it just ended just like that. Everything we had put into place to begin her caregiving team, all the work we had did with the research and just looking forward to letting her latter days be sweet. We knew that they would be slim, but we had no idea that we would be shaken so soon. That was my first instance of grief. And that was my first instance of walking a loved one through grief. My husband being an only child, it was a very difficult journey for him. And it was hard to be right there watching him suffering from losing his mom. And so we became like best friends. We did everything together. And him not having a sibling, I kind of became a sibling wife. And we managed it, and I supported him as best as I could. And that was the beginning of understanding what grief was like. A few weeks after we buried Mom, we found out some very exciting news. That exciting news was that we were expecting. And the funny part about it was at Mom's funeral, all the old little church ladies kept looking at my stomach and kept saying, "Are you guys going to have some more kids? Are you expecting some more kids?" And my husband and I, we laughed and we just shoved it off like, I wish they would not do that and mind their business. You know, I was a little chunkier. I just didn't anticipate, that it had anything to do with another child. But to our surprise, shortly after we buried Mom, my husband and I and our 2 sons were joyfully expecting another child. And the expectation of new life in the midst of loss was like a sweet aroma coming against the sourness of losing Mom. It helped us to encompass joy in the midst of pain. And we began to have delight in our days and something great to look forward to, new memories to build and new memories to hold. A whole new legacy had entered in as one had exited. So we went through, and that pregnancy was going extremely well, no problems. And a few months later, September, I still don't always remember the day of that time, and that is sometimes, I think, part of the grief. When you're grieving, sometimes you forget dates, sometimes you forget facts, but you never forget how you feel. Well, I can tell you about a day that pretty much turned my life upside down. And that day was in September. And I remember waking up. I had a great day. It was a wonderful day. I had energy. I was getting ready to support Jendai for her conference that day. I had talked to my friend Liz on the phone that morning, and everything was well. My boys were great, and I was in that time and season where my body was feeling wonderful. Well, I went in for a routine medical exam for my pregnancy and found out in that very moment, that very day, that was one of the most joyful days that I had experienced in a long time, was also one of the most saddest times that I could ever recall in my life. It was about the heartbeat. Think about it. A heartbeat is life. And in a moment, I went from having a heartbeat on the inside of me, and the next moment, no heartbeat. At least that's what the doctor said. She said, "I cannot find a heartbeat. I don't see one." And I remember thinking, "But can't you hear one?" And she was trying to tell me that the pregnancy that I was just in love with, I loved being pregnant. There are 2 things that I absolutely felt the most beautiful in my life: when I became a bride and whenever I was pregnant. And in that instant, she let me know that the baby I was carrying was no longer it crushed me. Everything moved quick. My hopes for him, my dreams for him, my hopes for my family. We have just experienced one loss. Now we're at another loss. A child. Couldn't have ever imagined the pain to experience the loss of a child. Now, here's the funny thing. Grief is really not to be compared. So my husband lost his mother, and we lost a child within 3 months. 3 months. We barely got to enter into the grieving process of losing his mom before we had another situation of grieving. And our grief was not to be compared. They were completely different. But I want to tell you about my hope hero. So when I talk about courageous hope, I want to tell you about my hope hero, even in the midst of grief. My hope hero is actually here in this room with me tonight. My hope hero is actually the person that, I sleep in the bed with him every night. My hope hero, when I lost Adam, was my husband. I'll tell you why. He exhibited such courageous hope for me. There was one thing he said to me in the hospital that ushered me into a healthy grieving journey. My husband said to me, he said, look, this is painful. This is hard. We're not going to stuff it down. We're not going to act like it doesn't hurt. We're not going to just move on with life. We're not going to pretend. This was the worst feeling in the world. He said, I lost my mother, and that was painful. Yet this is a tsunami on my soul. I cannot help you. I cannot fix it. And I don't know what to do, but we're going to get help. He probably doesn't even remember what he said to me. He probably doesn't even remember how much hope he gave me in those words of permission to grieve. As a man, as my husband, as the father of our children, it meant the world to me. It was actually his words of release that released us into courageous hope. Not knowing what would come out of losing Adam, but courageous to hope that we could get through it. That we could get through it and we would get through it together. And so whatever grief you're walking through, I want you to be encouraged that it is courageous to hope. It's courageous to think that somehow, I don't know how, but I will get through this. The next thing I want to talk about is compassionate help. When people grieve, they need the right kind of help. They don't have their wits about them to tell you what they need. Many people grieve for the first time or the second or third time, whether it's multiple times. It's confusing. It's devastating. It's painful. It doesn't make sense. It can't always be articulated with words or a conversation. And so it takes compassionate help to help a grieving soul mend. And I experienced compassionate help. Losing Adam was so crushing, I didn't even want to wake up sometimes because I had to deal with the reality of what I had experienced. So losing a baby is like I came home from the hospital. I went into the hospital pregnant. I came home from the hospital without a baby. And not to be graphic, but my body was still saying, you have a baby. My breasts were still producing milk. It was giving indication that you had a baby. you went through the birthing process, and then there's no baby. There's no baby. And it took a lot of truth and me coming into the point of embracing this new reality. One thing that I said when I was in the hospital room, in the triage, waiting for my husband and my pastor at the time to arrive, Pastor Kathleen, I said, I have two options. Lord, either you're going to perform a miracle or you're going to perform a miracle. And my two options were either you're going to put Adam's heartbeat back or Adam is in glory with you. But both of them were a miracle. I had to trust that somehow God knew, he knew my pain, he was in control, and I have to walk through grappling with the grief, the anger, the disappointment, the confusion, the denial, the shock. But I didn't have to walk through it alone. That the Lord was my help. He was my help. And not only was he my anchored help, he sent me help in human form. He sent me help in my friends and in my family to help me through this journey, to pray for me, to push me through, to hold me up and to lift me up when I couldn't lift myself up. He sent me help. And Pastor Kathleen, she was the epitome of grace in my life. She didn't say much, but she showed up much. She just had a way of being the right person at the right time, doing the right thing. I didn't know what I needed as a griever. I had no idea what to expect of myself or others. I also had compassionate help in my friend Liz, who called me every single day after the grief, after the burial, after the silence. I didn't know what kind of help I needed, but her just checking in with me. And I had help from many of you, many people. I won't name you all by name because this is not about you or your story today. It's about me and mine. And that was one thing that helped me to grow, that I got to own my own grief journey. And I didn't have to be politically correct for anyone, that I could be free to grieve. And I could be free to say what I needed to say without offending people. And in my grief, I learned what I now coin. I coined this because I know God gave it to me. I coined what's called double honor. In my grief, I learned that I will not dishonor myself to honor another, and I will not dishonor another to honor myself. That grief did not give me permission to treat people bad. Grief did not give me permission to not walk in love. It actually grew me up. And it was the compassionate help that surrounded me that helped me to grow. Elder Brenda, she was part of that core team. She helped me to understand from a mental perspective what was taking place in my body, what was taking place in my mind. She helped me to normalize what felt out of control. She helped me to understand this is part of the process. You're not crazy. You're not losing your mind. This is the impact grief has on a soul. You are grieving. I learned that grief is not a disease. It's a process. I received compassionate help. And the last point is collective healing. This is the part that has fueled my passion to help other people. When we were grieving, we lost Adam, we lost Mom, And we lost a spiritual niece. And I think the impact of her life on our life during such a crucial time where loss was all around us was a breaking point. That was the point where I said, we are not talking about grief in our community. I don't know what to do. Does anybody know what to do? We need help. We need to normalize this. We need to know that there's got to be some type of support for people who are devastated and who are suffering through grief, loss, and trauma. And grief, loss is trauma. It's traumatic. Life changes. For some people, income changes, status changes. Losing a loved one affects you in a variety of ways. Your life will never be the same when you lose a loved one. So collective healing came into place when I realized it wasn't just me. It was me. It was my friend Beatrice. It was my brother and sister Louis and Kim Ray. There were several other people who were impacted by a whirlwind of grief. And I felt like we had to do something about it. And so I was crazy enough to call them while they were grieving. Now, I don't recommend this unless, of course, God puts a new mission on your heart. But I called them while they were grieving. And I said, would you partner with me in doing something for ourselves and the community to talk about grief? Because maybe if we heal together, maybe we can help each other. And that's where the collective healing came in play. So just to give you a brief timeline, we lost Granny. I called her Granny affectionately. The grandkids called her Granny, and it was catchy. We lost Granny in May of 2018, just days after her birthday. We lost Adam in September of 2018. We lost Brianna in November of 2018. By the beginning of December, we started planning for the first Grieve, Gracefully conference. I know the Lord put it in my heart to do. And by March of 2019, a panel of qualified presenters, qualified by experience and expertise, those who were actively grieving, came together and we gave our stories. Beatrice gave her story of losing her husband, John. Elder Brenda gave us the backdrop of what grief is from a clinician perspective, and she had just lost her aunt. Debbie Stafford talked about compound and vicarious trauma, and she just lost her husband. I was amazed at the willingness and participation of those who were grieving partners around me to come together to collectively heal. And this was the birthing of Adam's purpose. Now remember, I told you that when I left that hospital room, I declared to the nurse that I would discover, that I would do something with this loss, and that I would discover, I would find, and I would search out what Adam's purpose was, because I don't believe that the Lord would allow me to get pregnant and birth him and there be no purpose. I had to discover the purpose, even in the midst of the pain. And so I stand here today, so very humbled before you, to declare that Adam's purpose is being revealed in the earth. And this is how I raise him. I cannot raise him like I raised my other 3 sons. I raise him by helping others, by saying, you can grieve, you can cry, you don't have to stuff it down. You can live forward. You can grow through your grief. You can express your sorrow. As I get ready to close, I just want to encourage you all with a few things that helped me through this collective healing process. And that was sharing my story was the ignition for it to come about. It's okay to talk about your grief. If someone doesn't want to hear it, then talk about it to someone who has the capacity to journey with you, to hear your heart. Don't dummy down your experience for the sake of someone else's comfort. Talk about it. Jendai said, write about it. Get a journal. Find a support group. Get counseling. These are the things that we are looking to foster help, hope, and healing for a grieving community. Grief is your expression of the love that you're unable to give. And grief is a journey. It's not to be compared. My encouragement is walk it out. And walk it out as healthy as you know how. Don't allow it to become toxic, because it can. One of the things I heard when I would go before the Lord in my grief journey, sometimes I could not get myself up off the floor. My husband knows, because he had to pick me up, literally, a time or two. But as I began to pray through the pain, and it was difficult to pray through the pain, there was a significant time when I went before the Father and I just cried out. I moaned, I groaned. I had no words. And one day, he gave me the sweetest instructions. And he told me, grieve, but grieve in my presence. Give it to me. And you're going to do this not once, not twice, but as often as you need to. Don't rush yourself. Don't minimize the impact in your life. And don't curse the grief. Grieve in his presence. Let him give you the beauty for ashes. Let him give you the oil of joy for the heaviness. And let him crown you with the spirit of praise. So as I wrap up, I want to encourage you to have courageous hope. It's not easy, but you can grow through it. You can live through it. This is not even popular. I think people don't talk about grief. Don't let the trauma define you. Let it refine you. I will say this to you. I will never be the same, and I don't want to. I am Adam's mom. I gave birth to Adam. But in reality, Adam gave birth to me. And the transformation, even through the grieving process, has been something I cherish. And nobody but God could do it. So I'm grateful for you joining us tonight. I pray that you have the courage to hope, whatever the circumstance of your loss, whether it was a sibling, a spouse, a friend, a parent, a child, whomever. Maybe it was multiple losses. I pray you have courageous hope. That you can hope through it. Not to minimize it. It can get better. And that you would receive compassionate help from on high and in the community of those who understand you, who know maybe a smidget. They don't know you and your story. They can't say, I know how you feel, but they can say, I know how I felt. And I pray that you can heal collectively among other grievers who are journeying forward, just like you. Thank you for joining us tonight. I pray that you were inspired.